rough undercurrents is even more difficult when the weather betrays you. This is somewhat like how the economic growth looks when your weather is actually fraught with policy paralysis and inflation. So, to throw more light on this issue, today I have with me the man himself, Sukumar. Thanks, Sukumar, for being on this show today. My first question to you is going to start with the corporate space. We know that last week Reliance 4G was dominating the news. Now, how do you perceive this venture? Do you see this reflective of Mukesh Ambani's ambitious plans, the telecom sector? Or would you see it with a little more skepticism?
Mukesh Ambani has always been extremely interested in the telecommunications space. In fact, the company that's now Reliance Communications used to be called Reliance Infocom, and it was created by him. He built it. He used to work 17, 18 hours a day. It was a very ambitious project, and they launched it with much fanfare. And although the company hasn't really done extremely well financially, one has to admit that it was the company that changed the face of telecommunications in this country. Largely through pricing related gambits, but it changed the face of telecommunications. So it's quite likely that they'll do something similar in the case of broadband wireless or 4G. Now, there are 2 or 3 points that you really need to look at. The first one is the fact that Reliance has never done well in a consumer facing business. They've done extremely well in project businesses, but they haven't really done all that well in businesses where they have to interact with a large number of customers. And it's not because of the brand or anything, because a lot of Indians are aware of the brand. I think it's just the way their DNA is geared. And they'll really have to change that and prove that it can happen. It hasn't happened in the case of retail, where they're trying to now regain a lot of lost ground. But you'll have to see whether it happens. The second thing is really this whole spectrum play. Things are still very unclear. Ideally, this company would like to get spectrum in a certain frequency which is currently not available, which is the 700 megahertz frequency. Now, if that happens, it would put them at a distinct advantage when compared to their competitors. The third one is really the new telecom policy, another regulatory issue, which will allow companies that have licenses to offer broadband wireless services to also offer voice through VoIP. It won't be a game changer, but voice is the basic service that you'll need to offer. And finally, the important thing to look at is what device are they going to use? There aren't too many 4G devices. They're going to use a standard called LTE and long-term evolution, and there aren't too many 4G devices on LTE which are available in the market right now. So which one are they going to use? Well, the rumors suggest that it's going to be some form of tablet. Now, well, obviously it has to be some form of tablet or some form of smartphone, but what will it be? Now, those are the key issues that need to be answered, but clearly in the next 12 months, I think this will be one of the most interesting things to happen in the whole technology space in India.
Also, there's something very core to RIL strategy, which is content. We had 3G services, but we saw there was a lack of innovative content and value-added services substantiating 3G services. Do you see that replicating with 4G, or you think it'll do much better?
I think anyone who launches 4G services would have learned from what happened with 3G in India. I think companies here bid so much, they spend so much money on their bids for spectrum for 3G that they really didn't have either the money or the energy probably to go out and acquire content and really offer value-added services. Reliance, I think, is already making all the right moves. The kind of deals that they've struck in the content space with television channels, with newspapers and newsrooms. So obviously they're very, very conscious of the fact that content is really going to be a big game changer. But this again is very similar to what they'd done when they initially launched their telephone services in 2002, because they used to speak of triple play at that time, which is voice and data and entertainment. And if you listen to Mukesh Ambani talk at that point in time, one of the key things that came across was the fact that the company was actually thinking in terms of commerce, e-commerce, it was thinking in terms of education, it was thinking in terms of entertainment. Didn't really happen in the case of telecom in 2002, could well happen with 4G in 2012.
Also, pricing strategy. I think in 2002 there was an entire telecom bust happening because it was providing almost free mobile phones with such low call rates. Do you think it's going to get its act fine with the 4G pricing?
You'll have to see. Reliance has been known for very, very aggressive pricing, and they've also been known for, in India, for instance, they were the first company to really offer bundled services. Unlike the US, where you can get an iPhone along with a plan with any telecom service provider, in India that usually doesn't happen. But in 2002, when they launched, they tied up with some of the large Korean manufacturers and they offered bundled deals where you pretty much got the phone for free in exchange for, agreeing to be with the company for a certain period of time and everything else. I have a feeling that they may do something similar to that, because what it would really do is increase penetration of broadband in this country. Penetration of broadband in this country is still very low. Any company that goes out and gets the numbers stands to make a lot of money in the long term if they play their cards right. But the first step is really customer acquisition. In 2002, they acquired the customers, but they really couldn't latch on to them and they couldn't make them pay for themselves, which is really why Reliance Communications, as the company is now called, has a lot of subscribers but doesn't make a whole lot of money and is not hugely profitable, has a lot of debt on its books. So clearly, if they manage to get the customers in the first step and then make them pay for all the content, make them buy things using this, things could be different.
Okay, let's talk of the IT sector. We know that TCS and Infosys released their quarter results, and what results? It was really conflicting figures and gives a very contrasting picture of the IT sector. So a little bit about Infosys. It's shown that there are dismal growth rates. It's cut its fiscal growth rate to almost 5%, where it was 8 to 9%, which is quite a big growth cut. So why do you think this is happening? What is the reason behind the struggle for Infosys?
See, I think you need to look at the larger picture. And the larger picture has got two or three elements to it, which I think have largely been drowned out by all this noise about Infosys and TCS and all the other companies in the sector. The first one is Indian IT has been searching for this elusive thing called nonlinear growth. Because if you really look at how Indian IT companies grow, they add people, they grow. They add people, they grow. And if you look at a correlation between the number of people they add and their growth, it's a fairly straight line correlation. So clearly, these companies have to do something which will help them grow faster without really adding too many people. And it's not a great time to look for an alternative model, because in the last 10 years, you've heard lots of models. You've heard of transformative consulting services. You've heard of platform-based services. You've heard of software as a service and pay-per-use model. Now, of course, the cloud is the big thing, and everyone's looking at the local market and saying, we'll cater to the needs of small and medium enterprises through services which we host on the cloud. None of these has really become very lucrative. But companies will eventually have to move towards that. So I think the entire industry is in this transition phase. Now, some companies obviously will do better in the transition phase. Some companies will not do well in the transition phase. The problem with Infosys, I think, is they have this plan which they've articulated fairly well called Infosys 3, which looks at how they really want to move a substantial chunk of their revenue to the consulting side. So they want that to account for a lot. It's not a great time to do that, because consulting it's the most discretionary spend that any company can take up. So obviously companies are not going to be very willing to do that. They're far more comfortable doing the traditional kind of work. So I have a feeling that this could be one reason. But there are lots of other issues which are bundled up in this as well. I think Infosys hasn't really managed its people as well as some of the other companies. So online bulletin boards are abuzz with all kinds of angst that are coming out from Infosys. So clearly, they need to get a lot of those internal issues also right. And personally, I just think that this whole business of having a bunch of promoters and then having them queue up to take the top spot isn't really the best thing to do, especially not for a company which very early in its life set very high standards for governance and management and spoke about meritocracy and all these things. So I just think what happens when you do something like this is that a lot of talented senior managers probably look outside the company, and Infosys could well be paying the price for that.
So you're talking of a more traditional sort of way of working and structure. Do you think TCS is then more modernist in its approach, and its volume growth is driven actually quite a lot by foreign markets, and growth figure for India is still quite, it's been cut out. So do you think TCS is following a better strategic foresight where, investments are concerned?
TCS numbers look better than the Infosys numbers, but they still, if you look at it, they still display the same undercurrent of uncertainty that is there in the larger environment. It is just that when you look at it relative to the Infosys numbers, they look a lot better. But does one get a clearer picture of how TCS is going to achieve that non-linear growth? No. I don't think any Indian company has given us an accurate or a proper explanation as to how they're going to do that. But comparatively, and in the stock markets, everything is comparative. So comparatively, TCS numbers look a lot better.